I'm Jessica, 32, and my story begins. Last year, I got a strange call. A financial advisor told me I was the beneficiary of a $150,000 life insurance policy and an $85,000 trust my late father left me. Except, I never saw a dime. The money was gone, spent, and my signature had been forged. When I confronted my family, secrets unraveled that shattered everything I thought I knew about being the disappointing daughter. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and thanks for being here. I grew up in Aurora, Colorado, in a split-level house on Maple Street that my parents bought in 1995. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. My dad, Michael, was a project manager for a construction company. My mom, Linda, worked as a medical billing specialist at Presbyterian Medical Center. My older sister, Sarah, was everything a parent could want in a daughter. Sarah was 2 years older than me, blonde, outgoing, athletic, and always at the top of her class. Teachers adored her, other parents held her up as an example, and my mother never stopped reminding me of it. "Why can't you be more like Sarah?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. A B+ from me was a failure because Sarah never got less than an A. When I struggled to make friends, it was, "Sarah has plenty." When I showed an interest in writing and art, it was brushed off as hobbies that won't lead anywhere. My dad, Michael, was the only one who tried to balance things out. He was patient, encouraging, and always told me my creativity mattered. But he worked long hours, and whenever he wasn't home, the comparisons came back full force. Things got worse when Sarah started dating Jake, the quarterback from a wealthy family. Mom beamed with pride, proof, she said, that she'd raised the kind of daughter who knew how to secure her future. Meanwhile, I kept my head down, filling notebooks with stories and sketches. Even when I won second place in a statewide writing contest, Mom's only comment was, "Why not first?" But the real shift in our family happened during my junior year of high school. My dad had a massive heart attack while working on a construction site. He was only 45 years old, and none of us saw it coming. One day he was teaching me how to change a car tire in the driveway, and 3 days later I was standing at his funeral in a black dress that Linda said made me look washed out. Sarah handled Dad's death the way she handled everything, with grace and strength that everyone admired. She spoke beautifully at the funeral, organized meal trains for our family, and somehow managed to keep her grades up while helping Mom with the paperwork and insurance claims. I, on the other hand, fell apart. My grades dropped, I stopped writing, and I spent most of my time hiding in my room listening to music. "Sarah is being such a help during this difficult time," Linda would tell relatives and family friends. "I don't know what I'd do without her strength. She's really stepping up to take care of the family." The implication was clear. While Sarah was stepping up, I was falling down. While she was helping, I was being a burden. The message was delivered with sighs and meaningful looks, but it was loud and clear. 6 months after Dad's funeral, Linda started dating again. His name was Robert Chen, and he was a financial advisor she'd met through work. Robert was everything Dad wasn't: polished, ambitious, always checking his phone during dinner. He drove a BMW, wore expensive suits, and talked constantly about investment opportunities and market trends. Sarah loved him immediately. Robert praised her business instincts, talked about college planning, and promised to help her apply for scholarships. With me, he was polite but distant, clearly unimpressed by my artistic interests and mediocre academic performance. They married 18 months later in a ceremony that felt more like a corporate event than a wedding. Sarah was the maid of honor and gave another perfect speech about new beginnings and blended families. I was a bridesmaid who stumbled slightly walking down the aisle and forgot to smile for most of the photos. Robert moved into our house with his teenage daughter from his first marriage, Melissa, who was my age and somehow managed to be even more accomplished than Sarah. Melissa played violin, spoke fluent Spanish, and had already been accepted to 3 different pre-med programs as a high school senior. Suddenly, I wasn't just the disappointment compared to Sarah. I was the disappointing daughter in a house full of high achievers. Dinner conversations revolved around SAT scores, college applications, and career planning. When I mentioned wanting to study creative writing, Robert actually laughed. "Creative writing? That's not a major, that's an expensive hobby. You need to think practically about your future, Jessica. The world doesn't owe you a living just because you like to write stories." Linda nodded along, adding, "Your father filled your head with all these artistic ideas. but you need to be realistic. Look at Sarah and Melissa. They understand that success requires sacrifice and smart choices. By my senior year, the pressure was unbearable. Sarah had graduated with honors and was attending Colorado State University on a partial academic scholarship, majoring in business administration with a minor in marketing. She'd broken up with Jake but was already dating someone new, a pre-law student named David who came from a family of attorneys. Melissa had been accepted to Northwestern's pre-med program with nearly a full scholarship. Linda couldn't stop talking about how proud Robert must be, how smart he was to encourage Melissa's academic focus from an early age. And then there was me. Average grades, no clear career path, and a dream of studying creative writing that my family treated like a phase I needed to grow out of. The college application process became a battleground. Linda and Robert wanted me to apply to practical programs, business, communications, maybe education if I insisted on doing something nurturing. They refused to even discuss creative writing programs, calling them financial suicide and self-indulgent. I applied to their recommended schools as instructed, but secretly I also applied to 3 universities with strong creative writing programs: University of Vermont, Emerson College in Boston, and University of New Mexico. I used money from my part-time job at Barnes & Noble to pay for the application fees, and I had the acceptance letters sent to my friend Madison's house. When the letters came back in March, I'd been accepted to all 6 schools I'd applied to, including 2 of my secret choices. Vermont had even offered me a small scholarship based on the writing portfolio I'd submitted. I waited until the day before the enrollment deadline to tell them. We were at dinner, and Robert was talking about interest rates, or something equally boring, when I finally found the courage to speak up. I've decided to go to University of Vermont, I announced, setting down my fork. They have an excellent creative writing program, and I've been offered a scholarship. The silence at the table was deafening. Linda's face went white, then red, then white again. Robert looked like I'd just told him I was joining a cult. Absolutely not, Linda said, her voice sharp. We've discussed this, Jessica. You're going to University of Colorado, Denver, and you're majoring in communications. That's practical, it's affordable, and it's final. Actually, I said, my voice shaking but determined, I'm 18 years old, and I get to choose where I go to college and what I study. I've already sent in my enrollment deposit. Robert leaned forward, his businessman voice kicking in. With what money? College isn't free, Jessica. Your mother and I control the education fund your father left. And we're not paying for you to waste 4 years playing with words. That's when I learned that my father had left money specifically for my education. I'd never known about it. Had never been told that he'd planned ahead to help me go to college. The fund was apparently substantial enough to cover tuition at an in-state school. But Linda and Robert were threatening to withhold it unless I chose their approved path. This is exactly the kind of impractical thinking that's going to ruin your future, Linda said. And her voice had that disappointed tone I knew so well. Sarah understood that college is an investment in a career, not a playground for hobbies. This is why you'll never be as successful as your sister. You don't think strategically. But something in me had shifted. Maybe it was knowing that my father had believed in my future enough to save money for it. Maybe it was the realization that I was about to spend the next 4 years of my life proving myself to people who would never be satisfied. Or maybe I was just finally tired of being the family disappointment. Then I'll figure out another way, I said, standing up from the table. I'd rather take out loans and study something I love than spend 4 years and your money on something I hate just to make you happy. I moved out 3 days later, crashing with Madison's family while I figured out student loans and work-study programs. It took every penny I'd saved from my bookstore job, plus more loans than I wanted to think about, but I made it to Vermont that fall. Linda barely spoke to me for the rest of the summer. When she did, it was to remind me that I was making a terrible mistake, that I'd come crawling back when reality hit, that Sarah would never have been so stubborn about something so foolish. The last conversation we had before I left for college was brief and brutal. When this doesn't work out, she said, not even looking up from the magazine she was reading, don't expect us to bail you out. You're choosing to be irresponsible, and there are consequences for that. I wanted to say something back, something that would hurt her the way she'd been hurting me for years. Instead, I just said, I love you too, Mom, and walked out the door. College was everything I'd hoped it would be, and nothing like what my family predicted. The University of Vermont was beautiful, The creative writing program was challenging and supportive, and for the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who understood why I wanted to spend my time crafting stories instead of crafting business plans. My professors were accomplished authors who took my work seriously, giving me detailed feedback that helped me grow as a writer. My classmates came from all over the country, each with their own creative voice and unique perspective. I felt like I'd finally found my tribe. The financial part was harder than I'd admitted to anyone back home. Even with my partial scholarship, Vermont was expensive, and I was covering most costs through loans and work-study jobs. I worked in the campus bookstore during the school year and picked up summer jobs in Burlington to make ends meet. I lived on ramen noodles and thrift store clothes, but I was happier than I'd ever been. Meanwhile, Sarah was thriving at Colorado State. Her social media was filled with photos of sorority events, spring break trips, and date nights with David, who had indeed gotten into law school as planned. She graduated with honors, got engaged to David 2 weeks later, and landed a marketing job at a growing tech company in Boulder. Linda posted constant updates about Sarah's achievements. The engagement photos were professionally shot and gorgeous. The job announcement was shared with paragraphs about Sarah's work ethic and bright future. When David graduated law school and they bought a house together in Boulder, Linda posted a virtual tour with comments about how proud she was to have raised such a successful daughter. I wasn't tagged in any of these posts. I wasn't mentioned in any of the Proud Mother updates. As far as Linda's social media was concerned, she had one daughter, and that daughter was living up to every expectation. The silence from home was almost complete. I called on holidays and birthdays, leaving voicemails that were rarely returned. When Linda did call back, the conversations were brief and focused on practical matters. Was I keeping my grades up? Had I thought about what I'd do after graduation? Did I realize how much debt I was accumulating? She never asked about my writing, never mentioned the stories I'd had published in literary magazines, never acknowledged that I was succeeding in the field I'd chosen. It was as if she'd written off that entire part of my life as irrelevant. Robert never called at all. When I tried to reach out during my sophomore year, hoping to repair some of the damage, Linda had informed me that Robert didn't see the point in maintaining a relationship with someone who'd chosen to reject family guidance. The few updates I got about family life came through Sarah, who would occasionally text me photos or brief summaries of what was happening, but even those communications felt strained. Sarah was busy with her own life, and I got the impression that staying in touch with me wasn't exactly encouraged by Linda and Robert. During my junior year, I learned through a cousin's Facebook post that Robert had been promoted to senior financial advisor at his firm, and that he and Linda had bought a bigger house in a nicer neighborhood. The photos showed a beautiful colonial with a 3-car garage and professional landscaping. There was no mention of having room for me to visit. That same year, I won a national collegiate writing competition for a short story about family dynamics and small-town secrets. The prize included a $5,000 scholarship and publication in a prestigious literary magazine. When I called to share the news, Linda's response was lukewarm congratulations, followed by a reminder that prizes didn't pay back student loans. By senior year, I'd stopped calling except for major holidays. The conversations were too painful, the indifference too obvious. I focused on my thesis project, a collection of interconnected short stories, and started applying to graduate programs and entry-level jobs in publishing. I graduated magna cum laude with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Creative Writing and a minor in journalism. 3 of my professors wrote recommendations describing me as one of the most talented students they'd taught. I'd had work published in 6 different literary magazines and won 2 more competitions during my senior year. Linda and Robert didn't come to my graduation. Sarah sent a congratulations text and a $50 gift card to Barnes & Noble. The message said she was sorry she couldn't make it, but David had a work event that weekend. She was sure I understood. I spent graduation day with Madison's parents, who had driven up from Colorado to celebrate with both of us. Madison was graduating with a degree in environmental science, and her parents were so proud they couldn't stop taking pictures. When they insisted on including me in the family photos, I almost cried. It had been 4 years since anyone had been genuinely proud of my accomplishments. After graduation, I moved to Portland, Oregon, where I'd landed an editorial assistant job at a small but respected literary magazine called Pacific Voices. The pay was terrible, but the work was meaningful, and I was finally using my degree in a way that felt authentic to who I was. I found a tiny apartment in Southeast Portland and started building a life that had nothing to do with family expectations or sibling comparisons. I made friends with other writers and artists, started dating a guy named Marcus who worked at Powell's Books, and began working on a novel in my spare time. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't constantly measuring myself against Sarah's achievements or bracing for Linda's disapproval. I was just Jessica, figuring out my own path and discovering what I was capable of when I wasn't living in anyone else's shadow. The years passed quietly. I got promoted to associate editor, then senior editor. My novel found an agent and was published by a small press in 2019, earning decent reviews and modest sales. I started freelance writing on the side, contributing to magazines and websites, building a reputation in my field. Meanwhile, Sarah's life continued to unfold exactly as planned. She and David got married in a wedding that Linda documented extensively on social media. They bought a bigger house, got promoted at their respective jobs, and started talking about having children. Linda's posts about Sarah became even more frequent and effusive. I wasn't invited to Sarah's wedding. I found out about it the same way I found out about most family news, through photos posted online. In the comments, distant relatives asked where I was, and Linda responded that Jessica couldn't make it due to work commitments. This was news to me since I'd never been invited in the first place, but honestly, by that point, I was okay with it. I'd built a life I loved, surrounded myself with people who valued and supported me, and was making progress toward the writing career I'd always wanted. The family drama felt like something from another lifetime, painful but no longer actively destructive. That all changed with a phone call I received on a Tuesday morning in March 2023. I was at my desk at Pacific Voices, working on edits for our summer issue, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, a Colorado area code I didn't recognize. "Is this Jessica Patterson?" The voice was professional, businesslike. "Yes, this is Jessica." "Miss Patterson, my name is David Walsh, and I'm a financial advisor with Pinnacle Wealth Management in Denver. I'm calling because your name appears on several accounts that I'm currently auditing, and there are some irregularities I need to discuss with you." My heart skipped. Financial irregularities involving my name could only mean one thing. Something was wrong with my student loans or credit. Had I missed a payment? Was there some kind of identity theft? "What kind of irregularities?" I asked, already pulling up my online banking to check for any suspicious activity. "Miss Patterson, I need to ask you directly. Are you aware that you're listed as the primary beneficiary on a life insurance policy worth $150,000, and as the sole inheritor of an educational trust fund that's currently valued at approximately $85,000? I nearly dropped the phone. "I'm sorry, what?" "According to the documents I have in front of me, your father, Michael Patterson, established both of these financial instruments before his death. The life insurance policy was supposed to pay out to you directly upon your 18th birthday, and the educational trust was designed to cover college expenses for your post-secondary education." My hands started shaking. "I don't understand. I never received any life insurance money, and I was told there wasn't enough money in the education fund to cover my college costs. That's why I had to take out loans." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Miss Patterson, I think you need to come in for a meeting. There are some documents here that I believe you should see." We scheduled an appointment for the following Friday. I used a sick day and flew to Denver, staying in a budget hotel near the airport. I didn't tell anyone in my family I was coming to town. Something about David Walsh's tone had made me cautious about sharing this information until I understood what was happening. Pinnacle Wealth Management was located in a glass office building in the Denver Tech Center. David Walsh turned out to be a man in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of serious expression that comes from dealing with financial crime on a regular basis. He laid out the documents across his conference table like a detective presenting evidence. What I saw made my stomach turn. The life insurance policy was exactly as he'd described. $150,000 payable to Jessica Patterson upon the death of Michael Patterson. But according to the insurance company's records, the money had been claimed and deposited into an account controlled by Linda Patterson, acting as Jessica Patterson's legal guardian. Except I'd been 18 when my father died, which meant I was a legal adult and shouldn't have needed a guardian to access the money. The educational trust was even more disturbing. My father had indeed left money specifically for my college education, but it was much more than Linda had ever indicated. The original amount was $85,000, invested conservatively and earning modest returns over the years since Dad's death. But according to bank records, money had been withdrawn from the trust regularly over the past decade. Large amounts. The current balance was less than $12,000. Who authorized these withdrawals, I asked, though I was starting to suspect the answer. David Walsh pulled out another set of documents. All withdrawals were authorized by Linda Patterson, acting as trustee. However, according to the original trust documents, she was only supposed to have access to the funds for legitimate educational expenses. The withdrawals I'm seeing here, he paused, flipping through bank statements. Most of them don't appear to be education-related. He showed me the records. Over the past 10 years, Linda had withdrawn money from my trust fund for $15,000 for wedding expenses, $8,000 for family emergency medical bills, $12,000 for household repairs and improvements, $25,000 for investment opportunities, numerous smaller withdrawals for miscellaneous family expenses. None of it had anything to do with my education. All of it had been spent while I was struggling to pay for college with loans and part-time jobs. But the worst part was still coming. Miss Patterson, David Walsh said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Did you ever sign any documents giving your mother power of attorney or financial guardianship over your accounts? No, I said immediately. I was 18 when my father died. I wouldn't have needed a guardian, and no one ever asked me to sign anything like that. He nodded grimly. That's what I suspected. Because according to the insurance company and the bank, they have documents on file with your signature, authorizing your mother to manage these accounts on your behalf. He slid 2 more papers across the table. They were authorization forms, dated just a few months after my father's death. And there, at the bottom of each page, was my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. It was close. Someone had done a decent job of copying my handwriting, but I could see the differences immediately, the way the J in Jessica was formed, the slant of the letters, the pressure of the pen. This was someone trying to forge my signature and doing an adequate but not perfect job. Miss Patterson, David Walsh said, I think your mother has been committing financial fraud using your identity. And given the amounts involved and the fact that this crosses state lines and involves federal banking regulations, this is a serious felony. The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to process what I was learning. My mother hadn't just failed to support my college dreams. She had actively stolen the money my father had left to make those dreams possible. She had forged my signature, lied to financial institutions, and spent 10 years robbing me while watching me struggle with student loans and low-paying jobs. What's more, David Walsh continued, I'm not the one who discovered these irregularities. I was contacted by someone else who had questions about these accounts, someone who apparently has been doing their own investigation into your family's finances. Who? I asked, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. Your sister, Sarah Patterson Morrison. She's the one who asked me to look into these accounts. She specifically requested that I contact you directly rather than going through your mother. Sarah. Sarah had discovered this and had asked David Walsh to contact me directly. Sarah, who had been Linda's golden child, who had gotten all the praise and support and encouragement I'd always wanted. Sarah had uncovered Linda's fraud, and she'd made sure I found out about it. I think, David Walsh said gently, you need to talk to your sister. Sarah agreed to meet me that same evening at a coffee shop in Boulder, halfway between Denver and her home. I almost didn't recognize her when she walked in. The polished, confident woman from all of Linda's social media posts looked tired and stressed. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing jeans and a sweater instead of the professional outfits I was used to seeing. She hugged me when she saw me, and I could feel her shaking. I'm so sorry, Jess, she whispered. I'm so fucking sorry. We found a quiet corner table, and Sarah started talking before I'd even sat down. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you this for months, she began. her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know, I swear to you, I didn't know what she was doing. Tell me what happened, I said. How did you find out? Sarah took a deep breath. David and I have been trying to have a baby for 2 years. We finally decided to try IVF, but insurance doesn't cover it, so we needed to come up with about $30,000. David suggested we ask our parents for help, since both of our families have done well financially. She paused to sip her coffee, but I could tell she was really trying to compose herself. When I talked to Mom and Robert about it, they said they'd love to help, but they'd made some investments recently and didn't have that much cash available. But Mom suggested I might want to look into the trust fund Dad set up for education expenses. She said there might be money left over from our college costs that could be reclassified for other family expenses. Wait, I interrupted. Our college costs? What do you mean, our college costs? Sarah's face went white. You don't know about your trust fund? I just found out about it today from David Walsh. Linda told me there wasn't enough money in it to cover my college, which is why I had to take out loans. Jesus Christ. Sarah put her head in her hands. Jess, Dad didn't just set up one trust fund. He set up 2. One for each of us. Mine paid for my entire college education, and there was still money left over that Mom said we were saving for a house down payment. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too warm. I could hear my pulse in my ears. Your trust fund should have covered your college too, Sarah continued. When you left for Vermont, I asked Mom why you were taking out loans if you had education money available. She told me you'd forfeited access to the trust when you chose a school and major they didn't approve of. She said Dad had put conditions on the money that required parental approval for how it was spent. I couldn't speak. I just stared at her. I believed her, Sarah said, and she started crying. I'm so ashamed. I believed her because it seemed like something Dad might have done. He was always trying to teach us about making responsible decisions. It seemed plausible that he'd structure the money that way. But you found out different. When I went to look into accessing funds from your trust for the IVF, I found records of all the withdrawals. Withdrawals for things that had nothing to do with education, and when I started asking questions, the story stopped making sense. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed me a series of screenshots she'd taken. Bank statements, withdrawal records, and most damaging of all, copies of authorization forms with forged signatures. She's been stealing from you for 10 years, Jess. The money for my wedding? That came from your trust fund. The down payment on the house Mom and Robert bought? Your trust fund. The investment opportunity Robert put $25,000 into last year? Your money. I felt sick, literally nauseous. There's more, Sarah said quietly. The life insurance money Dad left you? Mom told me that you'd signed it over to help with family expenses after Dad died. She said you wanted to contribute to household costs during the difficult time. I thought it was generous of you, maybe a way to try to earn Mom's approval. I never signed over anything. I never even knew there was life insurance money. I know that now. When I found the authorization forms, I compared the signatures to birthday cards you'd sent over the years. It's not even close, Jess. She forged your signature on federal documents and has been stealing from you for a decade. We sat in silence for several minutes. The magnitude of the betrayal was overwhelming. It wasn't just the money, though, that was devastating enough. It was the realization that every financial struggle I'd faced, every loan payment, every time I'd eaten ramen for dinner because I couldn't afford groceries, all of it was unnecessary. The money to help me had been there all along. My own mother had stolen it and then watched me struggle. Why are you telling me this? I finally asked. You could have pretended you didn't find anything. You could have protected her. Sarah looked me directly in the eyes for the first time since she'd sat down. Because you're my sister, and what she did to you is unforgivable. But also because... She paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. Because I'm starting to realize that maybe I never knew the real reason you left home. Maybe it wasn't just teenage rebellion or artistic stubbornness. Maybe you saw something in Mom that I was too spoiled and naive to notice. I never saw this coming, I admitted. I knew she favored you, and I knew she disapproved of my choices. But I never imagined she'd steal from me. The more I've thought about it over the past few months, the more I've realized how differently we were treated. I got financial support for college, help with my wedding, approval for my choices. You got criticism and conditions and impossible standards. I thought it was because you were being difficult, but now? Now I think maybe she treated you badly because she was already stealing from you, and she needed to justify it somehow. If you were the irresponsible daughter who made poor choices, then maybe using your money to help the good daughter wasn't really theft. Maybe it was just smart financial planning. The psychology of it was almost worse than the financial impact. Linda had stolen my inheritance and then gaslit me into believing I didn't deserve financial support because of my poor decisions. She'd created a narrative where I was the problem child who had to be taught harsh lessons about responsibility, while using my own money to reward Sarah for making better choices. "What do we do now?" I asked. Sarah reached across the table and took my hand. "We do whatever you want to do. I'll support you completely. I'll testify. I'll provide documentation. I'll do whatever it takes to help you get justice. This is your decision, but you won't face it alone. What about your relationship with Mom? If I press charges, if this becomes public, it's going to destroy the family." "Jess," Sarah said firmly, "she destroyed our family 10 years ago when she decided to steal from her own daughter. Everything that happens now is a consequence of her choices, not yours." We talked for another hour, going through the evidence Sarah had collected and discussing next steps. She'd already consulted with David's law firm about the legal implications and had been told that the case was straightforward. Financial fraud, identity theft, forgery of federal documents. The evidence was clear and the crimes were serious. Before I left Boulder that night, Sarah said something that I'll never forget. "I need you to know that I've spent the last 3 months going through every interaction I've had with you over the past 10 years, and I'm horrified by how I acted. I thought you were being stubborn and impractical, so I supported Mom's narrative about your choices. I participated in making you feel like the family failure. I can't take that back, but I can promise that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." I drove back to my hotel room with my head spinning. In one day, I'd learned that my mother was a thief, my sister was actually an ally, and the financial struggles that had defined my early adult life had been completely unnecessary. But more than that, I'd learned that the family dynamics I'd internalized for so many years, the idea that I was the difficult daughter who didn't measure up, had been built on lies designed to cover up criminal activity. I had a choice to make. I could walk away, start over with the knowledge I now had, and try to move forward. Or I could fight back and demand justice, knowing that it would probably destroy what was left of my relationship with Linda forever. I called my editor at Pacific Voices and asked for an extended leave of absence. Then I called a lawyer. The attorney Sarah's law firm recommended was named Patricia Williams, and she specialized in financial crimes and family fraud cases. She was a woman in her early 40s with short gray hair and the kind of direct manner that comes from dealing with messy family situations on a regular basis. "Miss Patterson," she said, after reviewing the documents I'd brought, "this is one of the clearest cases of family financial abuse I've seen in years. The evidence is extensive, the paper trail is obvious, and the amounts involved make this a serious felony case." She explained that what Linda had done constituted multiple crimes: identity theft, financial fraud, forgery of federal documents, and breach of fiduciary duty as a trust administrator. The fact that the stolen money had crossed state lines and involved federally insured banks added additional charges and penalties. "The question," Patricia said, "is what outcome you're looking for. Are you interested in criminal prosecution, civil recovery, or both?" I thought about it for several days. The criminal prosecution would involve pressing charges with the district attorney's office, which could result in Linda facing jail time if convicted. The civil case would focus on recovering the stolen money, plus damages and interest. I want both, I finally decided. I want the money back, but I also want her to face consequences for what she did. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was 10 years of deliberate theft from her own daughter. Patricia nodded approvingly. "I think that's the right choice. In my experience, family financial abuse continues until there are real consequences. If you let this slide, she'll likely find ways to continue taking advantage of you or other family members." We spent the next several weeks building the case. Patricia worked with David Walsh to obtain additional banking records and documentation. We filed requests for handwriting analysis on the forged signatures. We gathered evidence of Linda's spending patterns and lifestyle improvements that had been funded by stolen money. The handwriting analysis came back exactly as expected. The signatures on the authorization forms were forgeries, and not particularly sophisticated ones. According to the expert Patricia hired, whoever had signed my name had been trying to copy my signature from another document, but hadn't quite managed to replicate the natural flow and pressure patterns of my actual handwriting. More damaging evidence emerged as we dug deeper. Linda had used my stolen trust fund money not just for family expenses, but for personal luxuries. There were withdrawals that corresponded exactly to the dates of family vacations I hadn't been invited on, jewelry purchases Linda had posted about on social media, and home renovations that had increased the value of the house she shared with Robert. Meanwhile, I was dealing with the emotional aftermath of these discoveries. I'd taken a leave of absence from my job and was staying in Colorado to work on the legal case, but the psychological impact was overwhelming. Every assumption I'd made about my family, every narrative I'd constructed about why I was treated differently, had been turned upside down. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Rachel Martinez, who specialized in family trauma and financial abuse. She helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just theft. It was a form of psychological manipulation designed to keep me from questioning the family's treatment of me. Financial abuse often goes hand in hand with emotional abuse, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our sessions. By controlling your access to resources and then blaming you for your financial struggles, your mother created a situation where you were both dependent on her approval and convinced that you didn't deserve her support. The therapy helped me realize that Linda's theft hadn't been impulsive or accidental. It had been part of a systematic pattern of maintaining control over me while favoring Sarah. By stealing my inheritance and then criticizing me for being financially irresponsible, Linda had created a self-reinforcing narrative that justified her actions. But the hardest part wasn't dealing with Linda's betrayal. It was coming to terms with how the rest of the family had been affected by her manipulation. Robert, it turned out, had known about at least some of the financial irregularities. Patricia's investigation revealed that he had been present when several of the larger withdrawals were made from my trust fund, and that some of the money had been invested in financial products that he had recommended and profited from as a financial advisor. Your stepfather wasn't just a passive observer, Patricia told me. He actively participated in and benefited from the theft. In fact, some of the investment opportunities your trust money was used for were his own clients' portfolios, which earned him commissions. Even more painful was learning how my extended family had been fed false information about me for years. Linda had told aunts, uncles, and cousins that I was irresponsible with money, that I had rejected family help for college, and that my financial struggles were the result of poor choices. She'd created a narrative where she was the long-suffering mother, trying to teach her stubborn daughter important lessons about responsibility. My Aunt Carol, my father's sister, called me after Sarah reached out to explain what was happening. "Jessica, honey, I'm so sorry," she said, crying on the phone. "Linda told us you didn't want help with college, that you were determined to do everything on your own even when the family offered to contribute. She said you were going through a rebellious phase and that the best thing we could do was give you space to learn from your mistakes. I never knew there was money available to help me," I told her. "I thought the family had decided I wasn't worth investing in because I chose creative writing instead of business." "Oh, sweetheart, we all thought you knew about your father's trust fund and were choosing not to use it to prove a point. Linda said you wanted to show everyone that you didn't need family money, even if it meant taking on debt." The conversation with Aunt Carol was both healing and devastating. Healing because it confirmed that my extended family did care about me and had been misinformed about my situation. Devastating because it revealed how extensively Linda had worked to isolate me and control the narrative about our relationship. As word of the legal case spread through the family, more relatives came forward with their own concerns about Linda's behavior over the years. My cousin Jake told me that Linda had asked to borrow money from him several times, always with stories about temporary financial difficulties that never quite made sense given her and Robert's professional success. My Uncle Tom, my father's brother, revealed that he'd offered to help with my college expenses years earlier, but Linda had told him I was too proud to accept help from the extended family. "She said you wanted to make it on your own," Tom told me. "I respected that, but I always wondered why you'd choose to struggle when there were people who wanted to help. Now it makes sense. You didn't know we'd offered." Patricia advised me to avoid direct contact with Linda while we were building the criminal case, but by October, we were ready to move forward. The district attorney's office had reviewed our evidence and agreed to file charges for financial fraud, identity theft, and forgery. The civil case was also ready to proceed. Before the charges became public, Patricia suggested that I give Linda one opportunity to respond to the allegations and potentially negotiate a settlement that would avoid a lengthy court battle. Sometimes in family financial abuse cases, the perpetrator will agree to full restitution, plus damages in exchange for avoiding criminal prosecution, she explained. Given the strength of our evidence, she might prefer to settle this quietly rather than face the possibility of jail time and public exposure. I was skeptical that Linda would take responsibility for what she'd done, but I agreed to one meeting. Sarah offered to be there for support, and Patricia would attend to ensure everything was properly documented. We arranged to meet at Patricia's office on a Friday afternoon in late October. Linda arrived with her own attorney, a nervous-looking man named Gary Henderson, who specialized in white-collar criminal defense. The fact that she'd hired a criminal attorney suggested she understood the seriousness of the situation. I hadn't seen Linda in person in over 4 years. She looked older than I'd expected, more fragile. Her perfectly styled hair was now completely gray, and she'd lost weight. But when she saw me, her expression hardened into the familiar look of disapproval I remembered from childhood. "Jessica," she said curtly, not offering a hug or any other greeting. "I understand you've been spreading some very serious accusations about me." Patricia intervened before I could respond. "Mrs. Patterson, we're here to discuss the evidence we've compiled regarding your unauthorized access to your daughter's trust fund and life insurance benefits. This isn't about accusations. It's about documented financial transactions and forged legal documents." She laid out the evidence methodically, bank records showing the withdrawals from my trust fund, copies of the forged authorization forms, handwriting analysis results, and documentation of how the stolen money had been spent. With each piece of evidence, Gary Henderson looked more uncomfortable, while Linda's face remained stone cold. When Patricia finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Gary Henderson spoke up. "My client is prepared to acknowledge that there may have been some irregularities in how the trust funds were managed. However, Mrs. Patterson believes she was acting in her daughter's best interests by maintaining control over assets that Jessica wasn't mature enough to handle responsibly." I couldn't stay quiet any longer. I was 18 years old when Dad died. I was a legal adult. You had no right to forge my signature or steal my inheritance, regardless of whether you thought I was mature enough to handle it. Linda spoke for the first time since the meeting began. "You wanted to waste that money on an art degree at an expensive out-of-state school. Your father worked hard for that money, and I wasn't going to watch you throw it away on some fantasy about becoming a writer. So you decided to steal it instead? You spent my college money on vacations and jewelry and home improvements while I was eating ramen and working 2 jobs to pay for school." "I used that money for family expenses," Linda said, her voice rising. "Everything I did was for this family's benefit. Sarah needed help with her wedding. Robert had investment opportunities that would benefit everyone. We had medical expenses when Robert's father was sick. I prioritized real needs over your selfish artistic ambitions." Patricia jumped in. "Mrs. Patterson, regardless of your motivations, you committed several felonies. You forged federal documents, committed identity theft, and stole approximately $170,000 from your daughter over a 10-year period. The district attorney's office is prepared to file charges unless we can reach an immediate resolution." Gary Henderson tried to negotiate. "Perhaps we can discuss a payment plan for restitution that would avoid the need for criminal charges." "The time for avoiding criminal charges was 10 years ago, before your client decided to systematically steal from her own daughter," Patricia replied. "At this point, we're looking at full restitution plus damages, and criminal prosecution is moving forward regardless." Linda finally seemed to realize the seriousness of her situation. Her composure cracked, and for the first time in the meeting, she looked directly at me. "Jessica, you have to understand. After your father died, money was tight. Sarah was doing everything right. Good grades, practical major, responsible choices. You were determined to go to some expensive school to study something that would never pay the bills. I thought if you had to work for your education, you might make better decisions. You thought forcing me into debt would teach me responsibility, while you were spending my inheritance on yourself? I always planned to pay it back, she said, but her voice was weak. The investments Robert made were supposed to generate enough return to replace what I borrowed. You didn't borrow anything, Mom. You stole. You forged my signature on federal documents and committed identity theft to steal money that Dad specifically left for me. The meeting ended without any resolution. Linda and Gary Henderson left to consider their options, while Patricia prepared to finalize the criminal charges. How do you feel? Patricia asked me after they'd gone. I thought about it for a moment. I feel sad, I said finally. I keep waiting to feel angry or vindictive, but mostly I just feel sad that it came to this. Sarah, who had been quiet throughout the meeting, spoke up. You don't have to feel guilty for holding her accountable, Jess. What she did was wrong, and there have to be consequences. I know, I said. I just wish she'd taken responsibility instead of making excuses. I wish she'd shown some understanding of how much she hurt me. But Linda wasn't done fighting. Over the next few weeks, she launched what Patricia called a scorched earth defense strategy. She started calling extended family members, claiming that I was being vindictive and trying to destroy the family over a misunderstanding. She told neighbors and family friends that I was an ungrateful daughter who was trying to send my own mother to prison over money. Most damaging, she started posting on social media about the situation, painting herself as a victim of a greedy daughter who was willing to lie about her own mother for financial gain. My youngest daughter has unfortunately been influenced by some bad advice and is now claiming that I stole money from her, one of her Facebook posts read. It breaks my heart that she would rather believe lawyers and strangers than trust the mother who raised her and sacrificed everything for her family. I pray that someday she'll understand that everything I did was out of love. The post got dozens of sympathetic comments from people who didn't know the full story. Seeing my mother portray herself as the victim while painting me as a greedy liar was almost harder to bear than discovering the original theft. But Sarah stepped in with a response that shut down Linda's social media campaign immediately. Mom, Sarah wrote in a public comment on Linda's post, Jessica isn't lying, and you know it. I've seen the bank records, the forged signatures, and the evidence of where the money went. What you did was illegal, and trying to turn family against Jess to avoid consequences is just making this worse. Take responsibility for your actions instead of blaming everyone else. Sarah's public support meant everything to me. It also effectively ended Linda's attempt to control the narrative, since Sarah had been the golden child, whose word carried weight with the extended family. The criminal charges were filed in November 2023. Linda was indicted on multiple felony counts: identity theft, financial fraud, forgery of federal documents, and breach of fiduciary duty. Robert was charged as an accessory for his role in some of the financial transactions. The local news picked up the story, running a brief article about a Denver area woman charged with stealing her daughter's inheritance. Linda's name and photo were published, along with details about the charges she was facing. I felt bad about the public exposure, but Patricia reminded me that transparency in financial crime cases helps protect other potential victims. Your mother spent 10 years convincing you and other family members that you were the problem, she said. Public accountability makes it harder for financial abusers to continue their manipulation tactics. The civil case moved more quickly, faced with overwhelming evidence and the reality of criminal charges. Gary Henderson advised Linda to settle rather than fight both cases simultaneously. In January 2024, we reached a settlement agreement. Linda would pay full restitution of $173,000, the original stolen amount plus interest, plus an additional $50,000 in damages and legal fees. The payment would come from the sale of her and Robert's house, along with liquidation of some of their investment accounts. More importantly for me, the settlement included a written admission of wrongdoing. Linda had to acknowledge in a signed legal document that she had unlawfully taken money that belonged to me, that she had forged my signature on multiple documents, and that her actions had caused me significant financial and emotional harm. The criminal case took longer to resolve. Linda's attorney tried various defense strategies, claiming she believed she had a right to manage the money as my mother, arguing that the trust documents were ambiguous about her authority, even suggesting that I had known about and approved the withdrawals, but was now lying for financial gain. None of it worked. The evidence was too clear, and the forged signatures were impossible to explain away. In March 2024, faced with the likelihood of conviction on multiple felony charges, Linda accepted a plea agreement. She pled guilty to financial fraud and identity theft, receiving a sentence of 2 years in prison, suspended to 6 months with the remainder served on probation, and 5 years of supervised probation. Robert received a lighter sentence, 1 year of probation and community service, since his role had been more limited. The day Linda was sentenced, I sat in the courtroom watching the woman who had raised me stand before a judge and formally admit to stealing from her own daughter. It should have felt like victory, but mostly it felt hollow. After the hearing, Linda's attorney asked if she could speak to me privately. We met in a conference room at the courthouse, with Patricia present to ensure the conversation was appropriate. Linda looked smaller than I remembered, older and more fragile. Prison, even a short sentence, had clearly terrified her. "I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I thought I was protecting you from making mistakes that would ruin your future. By stealing my inheritance and watching me struggle with debt for years, I always planned to make it right," she said. "I thought the investments would work out, and I could replace the money without you ever knowing it had been gone. But you didn't just take the money, Mom. You spent 10 years making me feel like I wasn't worth supporting, like I was the family disappointment who couldn't be trusted with financial help. Do you understand how much that damaged me?" Linda was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "I think I got so focused on trying to control your choices that I convinced myself everything I did was justified. I told myself I was being a good mother by steering you toward practical decisions." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was closer to taking responsibility than she'd ever come before. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you serve your sentence, and we both figure out how to move forward," I said. "I don't know if we'll ever have a relationship again, but I hope you'll use this time to think about why you felt the need to control and manipulate, instead of just loving and supporting your daughters." That was the last conversation Linda and I had for a long time. With the legal cases resolved, I had to decide what to do with my life. The settlement money had erased my student loan debt and given me financial security I'd never experienced. For the first time since college, I could make decisions based on what I wanted, rather than what I could afford. I decided not to return to my job in Portland immediately. Instead, I used the spring and summer of 2024 to focus on writing and processing everything that had happened. I rented a small cabin in the mountains outside Denver, where I could work on my second novel and think about what direction I wanted my life to take. The novel I wrote that summer was about family secrets, financial abuse, and the psychology of scapegoating. It was the most personal thing I'd ever written, but also the most honest. Writing it helped me understand my own experience and work through the complex emotions of betraying and being betrayed by family. Sarah and I grew closer during this time than we'd ever been as children or teenagers. She was dealing with her own guilt and confusion about Linda's actions, but she was also discovering aspects of our family history that she'd never questioned before. "I keep thinking about all the times Mom criticized you or compared you to me," she told me during one of our regular coffee meetings. "I thought it was normal sibling stuff, but now I realize she was systematically undermining your self-confidence to justify stealing from you." We talked through years of family interactions, reinterpreting them through the lens of what we now knew. Sarah began to understand that her favored status hadn't been earned through superior choices. It had been part of a deliberate strategy to create a family dynamic that justified Linda's financial abuse. "I got the praise and support because Mom was using your money to pay for my advantages," Sarah realized. "Every time she told me I was more responsible than you, she was really just covering up the fact that she was stealing your opportunities to give them to me." David, Sarah's husband, was incredibly supportive throughout the legal proceedings. He'd been the one to suggest that Sarah investigate the trust funds when they needed money for IVF, and he consistently encouraged her to support me even when it complicated their own relationship with Linda. "Your mom put you in an impossible position," he told me once. "She made you choose between your family's approval and your own integrity. The fact that you chose integrity, even when it cost you everything, says something important about who you are." My relationship with my extended family also improved dramatically once they learned the truth about what had happened. Relatives who had been distant for years reached out to express support and regret for believing Linda's version of events. Uncle Tom set up a small scholarship fund at the University of Vermont in my father's name, specifically for students studying creative writing who demonstrate financial need. It's what Mike would have wanted, he told me. He believed in supporting people's dreams, not crushing them. The most meaningful reconnection was with my father's best friend, Kevin, who had stayed in touch with Linda after Dad's death, but had gradually lost contact with me. When he learned about the legal case, he called to apologize for not staying more involved in my life. "Your dad made me promise to look out for you girls if anything happened to him," Kevin said. "I thought Linda was handling everything, but I should have checked on you directly. Mike was so proud of your writing. He used to show me your stories and poems all the time. He would have been devastated to know that his money wasn't being used to support your education." Kevin shared memories of my father that Linda had never told me. Stories about Dad's pride in my creativity and his concerns about Linda's tendency to be controlling. It helped me understand that my father had seen and valued the parts of me that Linda had consistently dismissed. As fall approached, I had to decide whether to return to my job in Portland or make a change. The financial security from the settlement gave me options I'd never had before. But it also meant I could take risks without worrying about immediate financial consequences. I decided to stay in Colorado and start freelancing full-time, writing for magazines and websites while working on my novels. The mountain cabin was too remote for year-round living, but I found a small house in Boulder that felt like a good compromise between access to the city and connection to nature. Being closer to Sarah was part of the appeal, but I also wanted to rebuild relationships with the extended family members who had been kept from me by Linda's manipulation. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I had a genuine support network in Colorado. My second novel, the one I'd written about family financial abuse, found a publisher more quickly than I'd expected. The editor who acquired it said the story was both timely and important, addressing a type of abuse that was often overlooked or misunderstood. Family financial abuse is incredibly common, but victims often don't recognize it or don't know how to address it, she told me. Your book could help people understand that this kind of behavior is both illegal and damaging, and that victims don't have to accept it as normal family dysfunction. The book came out in early 2025, and I did several interviews about family financial abuse and the warning signs that victims should watch for. It was strange to become a public advocate for something I'd discovered through my own painful experience, but it felt meaningful to help other people recognize and address similar situations. The most surprising development in all of this was how much my relationship with Sarah continued to evolve. She wasn't just supporting me through the legal case. She was actively working to understand and address her own role in the family dynamics that had enabled Linda's abuse. Sarah started therapy to work through her guilt and confusion about Linda's favoritism. She came to understand that being the golden child in an abusive family system had its own psychological costs, even if those costs weren't immediately obvious. "I spent my whole life trying to maintain Mom's approval," she told me during one of our conversations. "I never developed confidence in my own judgment because I was always looking to her for validation. In some ways, her favoritism stunted my emotional growth just as much as her criticism hurt you." She also started questioning other aspects of Linda's parenting that she'd previously accepted as normal. The pressure to make practical choices, the emphasis on appearances and social status, the way disagreements were handled through manipulation rather than direct communication. Sarah began to see these as problematic patterns rather than reasonable parental guidance. Most importantly, Sarah took concrete steps to repair the relationship with me that had been damaged by years of Linda's manipulation. She made a point of including me in family events, celebrating my achievements, and making it clear to others that she valued our relationship. When my novel was published, Sarah threw me a launch party and invited extended family members, making sure everyone knew how proud she was of my success. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything to me after years of feeling like my achievements were dismissed or ignored by my family. "I can't change the past," Sarah told me at the party, "but I can make sure everyone knows that I see you clearly now, and I'm proud to be your sister." We also worked together on practical steps to protect ourselves from future financial manipulation. Sarah had discovered that Robert still had access to some financial accounts that should have been closed after the criminal case, and we worked with attorneys to ensure that all inappropriate access was terminated. We also established a system for sharing information about any future contact from Linda or Robert, so that neither of us would be manipulated into keeping secrets from the other. The transparency felt healthy after years of family communications being filtered through Linda's control. Most surprisingly, Sarah and David asked me to be the godmother to their daughter when she was born in late 2024. Sarah had gotten pregnant naturally just a few months after we'd resolved the legal cases, and she insisted that the timing wasn't coincidental. I think my body knew it wasn't safe to bring a child into our family until we dealt with Mom's behavior, she said. I couldn't risk having a daughter who might be treated the way you were treated. Holding my niece for the first time, I realized that the legal battle had been about more than just recovering stolen money or getting justice for past wrongs. It had been about creating a family environment where future generations would be safe from the kind of manipulation and abuse that had defined my own childhood. Looking back on everything that happened, I'm struck by how many warning signs of financial abuse I missed or rationalized over the years. Linda's controlling behavior around money, her insistence that I wasn't ready for financial responsibility, her refusal to provide clear information about my father's estate. All of these should have raised red flags. But I also understand why I didn't recognize the abuse at the time. When financial manipulation is combined with emotional manipulation, victims often doubt their own perceptions and defer to the abuser's version of reality. That's one of the most insidious aspects of family financial abuse, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our therapy sessions. The abuser uses their position of trust and authority to gaslight the victim into believing that the abuse is actually help or protection. The therapy helped me understand that recovering from financial abuse involves more than just getting the money back. It requires rebuilding your sense of self-worth and learning to trust your own judgment about relationships and financial decisions. I also learned that family financial abuse rarely happens in isolation. It's usually part of a broader pattern of emotional abuse and control. The theft was just the most concrete and legally actionable part of Linda's manipulative behavior. Understanding this helped me make peace with the decision to pursue criminal charges. I wasn't destroying my family over money. I was holding someone accountable for a pattern of abuse that had damaged multiple family relationships. The most important lesson I learned is that you don't have to accept toxic family dynamics just because they involve relatives. Family members can be abusive, and victims have the right to seek justice and protection, even when the abuser is someone they're supposed to love unconditionally. This doesn't mean that families can't work through problems or that every conflict requires legal intervention. But when family members commit crimes or engage in systematic abuse, victims shouldn't be expected to prioritize family harmony over their own safety and well-being. As I write this in early 2025, Linda is serving the remainder of her sentence under house arrest and supervision. We haven't spoken since that brief conversation at the courthouse, and I'm not sure when or if we'll have contact again. I hope she's using this time to reflect on her behavior and develop healthier ways of relating to people. But I also know that change has to come from her, and I can't control or force that process. What I can control is my own healing and growth. I'm in a better place now than I've ever been. Financially secure, emotionally healthy, surrounded by people who value and support me, and pursuing work that feels meaningful and authentic. The house I bought in Boulder has become a gathering place for the family members I want to maintain relationships with. Sarah and David visit regularly with their daughter. Uncle Tom and Aunt Carol come for holiday dinners. Kevin stops by when he's in town, sharing more stories about my father and the dreams he had for my future. I've also developed friendships with other writers and artists in the Boulder area, building a chosen family of people who understand and support my creative work. For the first time in my adult life, I'm not trying to prove myself or earn approval. I'm just living authentically and letting relationships develop naturally. My writing has evolved too, becoming more honest and emotionally resonant. The experience of uncovering and confronting family secrets taught me that truth-telling, even when it's painful, creates space for genuine healing and connection. The novel about financial abuse has generated interest from readers who've experienced similar situations. I've gotten emails from people who recognize their own family dynamics in the story and found the courage to seek help or set boundaries. That response has been more rewarding than any critical praise or commercial success. Knowing that my story might help someone else recognize and address abuse makes the whole painful process feel worthwhile. As I finish writing this story, I'm sitting in my home office in Boulder, looking out at the Rocky Mountains and thinking about the journey that brought me here. 5 years ago, I was a struggling writer in Portland, convinced that I was the family disappointment who couldn't measure up to my sister's achievements. Today, I understand that the family narrative I'd internalized was built on lies designed to cover up criminal behavior. The financial struggles I'd experienced, the lack of family support, the constant criticism, all of it was unnecessary and deliberate. But more importantly, I've learned that surviving family abuse and building a healthy, authentic life is possible. It requires courage to confront difficult truths, support from people who care about your well-being, and a willingness to prioritize your own healing over maintaining toxic relationships. It also requires recognizing that you have more power than you might realize. For years, I accepted Linda's treatment of me because I thought I had no choice. I believed that family relationships were something you had to endure, rather than something you could actively shape. Learning that I could seek justice, set boundaries, and demand accountability was transformative. It wasn't easy, and it cost me relationships with family members who weren't willing to acknowledge the truth about Linda's behavior. But it also opened the door to healthier relationships and a more authentic life. If you're reading this and recognizing similar patterns in your own family, I want you to know that you deserve better. You deserve financial security, emotional support, and relationships based on mutual respect, rather than control and manipulation. You don't have to accept abuse just because it comes from family members. You don't have to prioritize other people's comfort over your own safety and well-being. And you don't have to suffer in silence because you're afraid of causing conflict or disrupting family harmony. Financial abuse is a serious crime, and emotional abuse causes real damage. Both deserve to be acknowledged and addressed, regardless of who perpetrates them. Getting help can feel overwhelming, especially when you're dealing with family members who have spent years convincing you that your perceptions are wrong or that you're overreacting to normal family dynamics. But resources are available, and you don't have to navigate this alone. Financial advisors, attorneys, therapists, and victim advocates all have experience with family abuse cases. They can help you understand your rights, document evidence of abuse, and develop strategies for protecting yourself while addressing the problem. Most importantly, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Family members who genuinely care about your well-being don't systematically undermine your self-confidence, steal your resources, or punish you for pursuing your own goals and interests. You deserve relationships that build you up rather than tear you down. You deserve financial security and the freedom to make your own choices about your life and future. And you deserve justice when people violate your trust and break the law, even when those people are supposed to love and protect you. The path forward isn't always clear, and healing from family abuse takes time. But it's possible to reclaim your power, rebuild your sense of self-worth, and create the kind of life you want to live. That journey started for me with a phone call from a stranger who'd discovered financial irregularities in accounts with my name on them. It led through months of investigation, legal battles, family confrontations, and difficult conversations about truth and accountability. But it ended with freedom, authentic relationships, and a sense of peace I'd never experienced before. It was worth every difficult moment. If this story speaks to you, if you've faced mistreatment, control, or abuse, please remember, change is possible, and you deserve better. Abuse is never normal, and family loyalty doesn't mean accepting harm. You have the right to safety, respect, and honest relationships. Trust yourself, reach out for support, and don't enable unhealthy patterns. Your future is worth fighting for, and you are stronger than you think. Thank you for reading. If this helps you, please share it with someone who needs the reminder. You're not alone, you're not broken, and you deserve so much more. The truth can be costly, but it always sets us free.